Strange man gives doll to boy. Parents call the police when they see what it really is. It was one of those calm Sunday afternoons that seemed made for families. The park was alive with laughter and the hum of lawnmowers in the distance. Linda Parker sat on a bench, her coffee cooling beside her, watching her 8-year-old son, Tommy, race across the grass toward the swings. The sun made his hair shine gold. For a moment, life felt simple and safe. Then she noticed him. A man stood near the old oak by the fence, half in shadow. His clothes were out of place for the warm day, an oversized brown coat, frayed at the sleeves, a faded cap pulled low. He wasn't watching anyone else, just Tommy. Linda straightened, her heartbeat quickening. The man crouched down and reached into his coat pocket. When he pulled his hand out, he held something small. Tommy slowed to a stop in front of him. The man said something Linda couldn't hear, his voice low, almost pleading. Tommy looked curious, then smiled. He reached out his hands, and the man placed a doll in them. Linda was on her feet before she even knew it, calling her son's name. Her voice carried sharp across the playground, turning a few heads. The man stood slowly, meeting her eyes for a moment. His face was pale, tired, lined with worry. There was something sad there, something she couldn't place. By the time she reached Tommy, the man was walking away, steady but quick. Linda's breath came short. She grabbed Tommy's shoulders, glancing at the doll in his hands. It was an old-fashioned porcelain doll, dressed in a tiny blue dress, its glass eyes almost lifelike, too lifelike. She turned to look for the man, but he was gone, vanished into the rows of parked cars beyond the trees. Tommy looked up at her, confused by her fear. He said the man told him to take care of it, that it was special. Linda tried to smile, though her hands trembled as she held the doll. It felt heavier than it should. She brushed dirt from its cheek, and for a second, she could have sworn she heard a faint click from inside it. The sound was so soft she thought she imagined it. But the uneasy feeling in her chest stayed long after the park had gone quiet. The next morning, Linda couldn't stop looking at the doll. It sat on the kitchen counter beside the cereal box, its painted eyes staring straight ahead. Tommy ate his breakfast, swinging his legs, humming like nothing had happened. Mark scrolled through his phone, half listening as Linda told him again how strange the man had been. When she mentioned the sound inside the doll, Mark frowned and picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, tapped the back, and gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a toy," he said, but his tone carried more doubt than comfort. He shook it once, then set it down again, a little too carefully. By noon, Linda had called the local police station. An officer arrived an hour later, a woman named Janet Ruiz. She examined the doll on the dining room table while Linda stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Janet pressed her ear against the back of it and frowned. "It's heavier than most," she said, "and there's something sealed inside." Tommy watched from the doorway, clutching the hem of his shirt. He asked if he'd done something wrong. Janet smiled gently and told him no, but Linda could see his small hands trembling. The officer carried the doll to her car, promising to have someone take a closer look. The house felt emptier when it was gone. That night, Tommy cried himself to sleep, and Linda sat awake in the living room, the sound of the wind against the windows making her jump. When Officer Ruiz returned the next day, she brought a different kind of silence with her. No explosives, she said, but something was definitely hidden inside. Metal, small, rectangular. It looked like a chip or a drive, lodged deep behind the porcelain and glue. Mark muttered that maybe the man was some kind of spy, but Linda didn't answer. Later, as evening light faded over the street, the local news ran the story. Linda saw her own neighborhood on the screen, reporters standing by the park, the headline flashing in red. "Mysterious man gives child strange doll." She switched off the TV, her hands cold against the remote. The house was quiet again, but the quiet didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like waiting for something she couldn't name. The next day began with flashing images on the television. Linda stood frozen in front of the screen as a news anchor spoke over a grainy photo. The man in the picture was the same one from the park. His name appeared in bold letters across the bottom. Edward Cole, former software engineer, wanted for data theft and obstruction of justice. Mark looked up from his coffee, shaking his head. "That's him, isn't it?" Linda nodded slowly, her stomach tightening. The camera cut to an image of police cars outside a warehouse, the reporter saying authorities believed Cole was still in the area. By noon, 2 patrol cars were parked on their street. Neighbors gathered near mailboxes, whispering. The Parkers' front lawn had become a quiet point of curiosity, everyone pretending not to stare. Linda closed the curtains, but the weight of their eyes pressed through the glass. Tommy sat on the couch, knees pulled up to his chest. He asked if the man was bad. Linda hesitated before answering. She said he must have done something wrong, but the words tasted uncertain. She remembered the look on his face that day in the park, not wild or cruel, just tired. Officer Ruiz returned that afternoon, her expression serious. The item inside the doll wasn't a weapon, she said, but a small storage chip. It wasn't like anything she'd seen before. It was encrypted, locked in a way that suggested something valuable. Ruiz promised to update them once the lab had more answers, but Linda noticed how carefully she avoided eye contact. When night fell, rain began to beat against the windows. Linda turned off the lights in the living room and watched the street glisten under the storm. She could see the reflection of the police cruiser parked at the corner, its wipers moving back and forth like a metronome. Then she saw movement near the hedge. A figure stepped out of the dark, soaked through, his coat clinging to him. He stood for a moment at the end of their driveway, looking toward the house. Linda's breath caught. Even through the rain, she recognized him. Edward Cole. He didn't run. He only lifted a hand slowly, as if to show he carried nothing. Then he took one hesitant step closer, his face drawn and pale beneath the streetlight. Rain pooled along the driveway as Linda opened the front door. Edward stood under the porch light, water dripping from his coat, his hands raised in surrender. His eyes were tired, but calm. He spoke softly, his voice rough from the cold. He said he wasn't there to hurt anyone, that he only wanted them to understand. Linda hesitated before stepping aside. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint thunder outside. Edward stood near the entryway, shivering slightly. He looked smaller in the light, more worn than she remembered. He told her he used to work for a technology company that handled security systems for the government. His job was to build programs that recorded data, the kind meant to protect people. But one day he found out the data had been changed, twisted to make innocent men look guilty. When he tried to report it, they turned the blame on him. Within weeks, he had lost everything. His job, his home, his name. Linda listened, arms folded tight across her chest. The story sounded impossible, but the look in his eyes carried something real. He said the thing hidden inside the doll could prove what really happened. He said it was the only copy left. Mark came in from the hallway, his voice sharp. He ordered Edward to leave, threatened to call the police again. Edward didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black flash drive. He placed it gently on the coffee table, his hand trembling. He said it went with what was inside the doll, that together they would make sense. The sound of sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. Edward glanced toward the window and took a slow breath. When the red and blue lights swept across the living room, he didn't resist. Officers moved in through the front door, handcuffs glinting under the ceiling light. As they led him away, Edward turned back toward Linda. His face was calm, almost peaceful. He said she would understand soon. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and flashing lights. The house fell silent again, the air thick with questions that refused to rest. Morning came gray and heavy. Linda sat at the kitchen table, the small flash drive beside her coffee cup. She hadn't slept. The house still smelled faintly of rain. Mark had taken Tommy to school, but the silence he left behind felt thick and uneasy. She stared at the flash drive, its black plastic catching the light, and finally picked it up. Later that afternoon, Officer Ruiz returned. Her expression had changed, less guarded, more curious. She told Linda that the lab had unlocked part of the device found inside the doll. What they saw wasn't stolen data, it was footage, hours of it, showing boardroom meetings, computer screens, and time-stamped reports. Edward Cole appeared in several of them, arguing, pointing at documents, trying to stop something. Ruiz said the flash drive might open the rest. They connected it. Lines of code filled the monitor, then shifted to clear video. Linda leaned closer as the sound came through. Executives discussed planting false information to cover failed projects. They mentioned Edward by name, laughing about how easy it would be to make him the scapegoat. Ruiz froze, watching in disbelief. By evening, the news broke. Federal investigators had reopened the case. Edward Cole, the man everyone called dangerous, was innocent. He had risked everything to reveal the truth, hiding the final proof where no one would think to look, inside a child's doll. Days later, Linda stood on her front porch as a familiar figure stepped from a black car. Edward looked cleaner, lighter, as if the years of fear had been peeled away. He thanked her for listening, for trusting what she couldn't yet understand. Then he knelt beside Tommy, who held the same porcelain doll, now harmless, its surface glinting in the sun. Edward smiled at the boy and said it had done its job. He shook Mark's hand, then turned toward the street, walking without hurry. The world had given him his name back. That night, while tucking Tommy into bed, Linda noticed a small note tucked beneath the doll's collar. The handwriting was careful, almost shy. It said, "For those who choose to see before they judge, thank you." She read it twice, then placed it back gently. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the last of the fear away.